Distinguished panelists and dear guests, this session of Financing Carbon Neutrality Roundtable will start in 5 minutes. Please take your seat and get ready for this session. Please note that this session will be live streamed online. Please do not walk around when the session formally starts. 尊敬的与会嘉宾，此次金融知识碳中和圆桌会将在5分钟后正式开始，请各位就座。请注意，今天的会议将有全程线上直播。会议正式开始后，请不要来回走动。The moderator today is Dr. Ma Jun, Chairman of China Green Finance Committee, Co-Chair of the G20 Sustainable Finance Study Group, President of Beijing Institute of Finance and Sustainability. 今天会议的主持人是马俊博士，他是中国金融学会绿色金融专业委员会主任， G20 可持续金融研究小组共同主席，北京绿色金融与可持续发展研究院院长。
好，请大家入座哈。
Please be seated. The roundtable is soon to start. Distinguished leaders and guests, good afternoon. My name is Ma Jun, founder and president of Institute of Finance and Sustainability, and chairman of Green Finance Committee of China's Society for Finance and Banking. On behalf of the organizer as well as the Green Finance Committee, I extend warm welcome to everybody. I want to spend a few minutes to review the work of China done in supporting green finance as well as some achievements. And then introduction on the context of financing carbon neutrality, the subject matter of today's roundtable. And then I will give the floor to the keynote speakers and then roundtable discussions about the green finance in China in the past 5 years. The initial framework has been established with 5 pillars. Number 1, green finance criteria, with 3 sets of criteria. First, in 2013 by CBRC, and second, 2015, led by the Green Finance Committee of China Society for Finance and Banking, and lastly, the third one, led by NDRC, the catalog for green finance. All of these criteria are being revised toward the target of financing carbon neutrality, with the high carbon industries to be removed from the original criteria. And secondly, disclosure standards. The Ministry of Environment and Ecology proposed the requirements for disclosure with the carbon emissions, and then the green bond issuers requirements, and in the future, more disclosure requirements are being proposed, especially targeting carbon emissions. Now, more specifically about the carbon emissions, more and more financial institutions recognize the need and the necessity of the disclosure of information on the lending credit. They need to report the projects or the lending they have dispersed to the borrowers. The third pillar being the incentives. Lending and relending incentives have been proposed, especially in the local level. were established, including guarantees and financial incentives, we need to further expand the scope for meeting the carbon neutrality targets, especially the low so-called. Now, the fourth pillar being the product system, centering around green credit and green bonds. With the 21 Chinese banks lending 12 trillion RMB, or 1.3 trillion in the past 3 years, ranking #1 in the world in terms of green financing or green credit. We will see significant growth this year as well. This is not enough, of course. We need to create a variety of products and services meeting different green finance related projects. Be it old or new green finance products and services, we need to focus on the development of carbon footprint related credit and bonds, especially focusing on the achievement of carbon neutrality, and finally, the international cooperation being the fifth pillar. Now, in this respect, a few years back, the G20 framework, the Sustainable Finance Study Group launched by China, with China and the UK being the co-chairs before, promoting the consensus on sustainable or green finance. No continuation until 2019, but this year, since Italy being the chairing nation of G20, relaunching the Sustainable Finance Study Group, co-chaired by China and the US, accepted now by the executive meetings or central bankers and the financial ministers meetings by China and the US, with the consensus achieved. 4 areas will be focused for sustainable finance or green finance consensus. In addition to the platform development, there are other mechanisms, including the central bank and NGFS, including PBOC, with 89 members for the network of green finance, so that the central banks will play a bigger role. And IPSF, launched by the EU and China and other nations. Under this framework, a working group was also established to study green finance and sustainability standards harmonization, co-chaired by the EU and China. In the second half of this year, hopefully, a set of green finance standards Now, our roundtable today is on financing carbon neutralities. There are so many sub-subject matters to be talked about. Opportunities and challenges as a result of the carbon neutrality targets. Many specific topics will be discussed. Criteria, cross-border capital flow for the carbon emissions reduction, and the neutralities of financial institutions internally. All these are interesting topics for today's roundtable. We're honored to be joined by a former governor of PBOC and also vice chairman of World Forum for Asia, Mr. Zhou Xiaochuan, who will give us a closing remark at the end of the roundtable, and also Governor Yi Gang of PBOC for opening remark, and the governor of Bank of Italy, Visco, as well as other prestigious leaders addressing this issue from different perspectives, specifically on carbon neutrality, with their forward-looking perspectives. The roundtable discussion will be followed. That will be a more casual format. The roundtable will be about 2 hours long. According to the agenda of the roundtable, I'd like to give the floor to Governor Yi Gang of PBOC for opening remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be here attending BFA's roundtable on financing carbon neutrality through video. My remarks today will cover 3 aspects. Number 1, how to better mobilize funding for green transition, and secondly, how to properly manage climate change-related financial risks, and 3, international cooperation and coordination, especially the important roles of multilateral platforms of G20. Number 1, the mobilization of funding for the sustainable green finance, green economy transition with the right leadership of the central government and the state council. The PBOC have been working with the different agencies for the strategy design in the following aspects. Number 1, the criteria for green finance. In 2015 and 2018, respectively, PBOC established green bond and green credit criteria, and soon the revised catalogs of green finance bond projects will be concluded, removed with the fossil fuel removed. And secondly, enhanced reporting and disclosure, especially the use and purposes of green credit for green finance in the CIBM. We will further establish an enhanced disclosure system covering all institutions with the consistent standards. And number 3, incentives. Green finance, including bonds and credit, are now included in PBOC's qualified collaterals for credit facilities. So with the carbon emissions cut tools, incentivizing more funds channeled to this area, with the credit rating of the commercial lenders and deposit insurance, interest rate, and macro prudential assessment will be used to promote enhanced green finance and emissions cuts. And now we've been working with the EU for common classification criteria for green finance, especially in harmonization of the criteria. By the end of the year, hopefully we'll see a new set of criteria as a reference for international investors. And on the other hand, further open up the Chinese financial industry, facilitating the international participation into the Chinese market with the negative list, as well as the expansion of businesses of FIs. We will further open up the capital markets.
Second, we're managing climate-related financial risks. Compared to developed countries, China and other developing countries in Asia are still in this process of industrialization and urbanization. Currently, China has announced its timetable for peaking of the carbon emission to carbon neutrality, which compared to developed countries in Europe and the United States is far shorter. And also, we are taking a steeper curve in terms of carbon neutrality, and thereby greater efforts should be made as countermeasures to make proper preparation. And we're also urging earlier transformation of the financial institutions at the level of the central bank. Timely assess climate change impacts on financial stability and fiscal and monetary policy. We're also trying to study in the stress test financial institutions, the elements of considering climate change in a systematic way. We're also trying to adapt the allocation of green bond in foreign exchange reserve to control the investment high carbon assessments, high carbon investment, and also incorporates deceptive elements in the framework of risk management. In terms of financial institutions, we are actually urging them to be prepared early on as a way to positively guard against financial climate change. The PBOC has already guided some of the pilot financial institutions to calculate the carbon emission in their projects to see its, say, climate as well as environment-related risks. We also established a nationwide carbon accounting system. On a quarterly basis, we are evaluating the green credit situation on commercial banks. At the same time, we're starting the establishment of a appraisal system for financial institutions on the performances in terms of green credit and green loans, as well as green bonds. Currently, there are issues underlying our green financial development. For example, prices of certain assets have not fully exemplified negative externalities in the environment. Because for one reason, some enterprises have not exactly disclosed their environmental information. On the other hand, they have not incorporated the practice of carbon pricing. We hope that financial institutions to actually take an orderly approach in green transition. In the process of transition, safety comes first, and we have to prioritize energy conservation while considering the precondition of the life cycle as lifetime depreciation of the current infrastructure design can accelerate green transition. Third, we should step up international coordination for green development. While the Asian area is actually having consensus on green transitioning, with major economies taking active activities. For example, the Korean government has issued the Green New Policy last year. Governments in Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, and Singapore also raised their objectives of carbon emission reduction. Japan is having guidelines on issuing green bonds. Regional level, we're also seeing already progression in our cooperation. With the organization of the East Asian Pacific Central Bank Governors Meeting, different parties are exploring the using Asian bonds fund to invest on local green bonds. And also on the basis of the ASEAN and China, Japan, Korea financial and economic cooperation, we are also establishing the kind of a study program infrastructure investment that is green and sustainable. Recently, the financial ministers of ASEAN, as well as their central bankers, have established the Asian taxonomy boards. And that decision is in line with establishing a multi-layered green taxonomy system for this particular region. And indeed, we can see that Asian economies has huge demand and great potential in green transition. Stepping up international cooperation is definitely good news for fostering the development of green financing in Asia. This, with great urge from Italy, the presiding country of G20 this year, G20 has relaunched the Sustainable Financial Study Group and upgraded that into a working group. From the perspective of PBOC, I think there are two particular items that needs further bolstering. The first is implementation of the green investment principles. At the end of 2018, we proposed the BRI GIP, encouraging financial institutions to really understand the ESG risks as well as make proper conduct in terms of environmental information disclosure while participating in the BRI developments. Altogether, 39 Chinese international financial institutions are in this agreement to better use green financial tools. PBOC will continue to encourage financial institutions to step up their efforts in BRI-related investments and requiring them to assess the risks posed on environment and climate with better information disclosure. Second, we should strengthen development of we should strengthen capacity in green development from multiple channels. PBOC will help developing countries to actually build up their capacity in green finance, to support them with greater capacity in actually having their own green transitioning against climate change. We hope that multilateral development institutions will play their strength and know-how to offer capacity building support to developing countries in need in terms of green finance. In general, the financial system is a very positive player in supporting green transitioning and managing the risk of climate change. Asian countries are definitely prioritizing, in a general way, green finance and economic transitioning. Thereby, we can join hands to work with different countries on our exchange and cooperation in green finance so that we contribute to global sustainable development with wisdom from BFA. And in the end, the targets of carbon emission peaking and carbon neutrality will be met. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Yi, for your keynote address. Well, you've noticed that on different publications, Mr. Yi talked about carbon neutrality and green finance. On a personal note, I think Mr. Yi has been playing more emphasis on green finance as well as carbon neutrality based on the number of times that he has talked about this, while we are actually seeing the resolve of the PBOC on trying to foster and reform green finance. At the same time, we're having compulsory and mandatory requirements on information disclosure for financial institutions in green finance, and also incorporates particular factors, climate factors, into our general governance structure. We need to support green finance, especially incentive for low carbon projects. All of these elements are highly innovative, and in the coming time, you're going to be seeing the execution of some of the particular policies. So now I'd like to invite our next speaker, Mr. Ignazio Visco, the governor of Bank of Italy, speaking to us.
For the impossibility of joining you in person in Boao. In these remarks, I will discuss the importance of international cooperation in supporting the transition to net carbon neutrality, and I will briefly describe the related activities that we are carrying on within the Group of 20. Climate change and the pandemic are the most important global problems of our times. There is no need to remind this audience that the increasing use of fossil fuels is pushing greenhouse gas concentrations to levels that, unless forceful measures are taken, by the end of the century will lead to a rise in the temperature of the planet that will bring catastrophic consequences for our ecosystems. Many of the root causes of climate change, such as deforestation and the loss of habitat, by raising the chance of contact between people and wildlife, also increase the risk of pandemics. As the United Nations One Health approach recognizes, our health is closely connected to the health of the planet. Climate change is in particular a classic example of negative externality. Carbon emissions represent a cost that spills over onto other markets besides the one in which they originated. But in this case, as Professor Nordhaus in his Nobel lecture pointed out, externalities are particularly thorny due to their global nature, which puts them outside the domain not only of markets, but also of national governments, just like the pandemics is doing in these days. A close international coordination is therefore needed. We must bear in mind that stopping climate change requires, first of all, a strong and consistent political determination. National governments are the only institutions that can provide incentives to green investments, levy taxes on carbon emissions, and introduce regulations limiting the amount of allowable emissions. But finance can go a long way in helping and reinforcing this process, channeling more resources towards green investments. For these reasons, the finance track of the G20 has put sustainable finance among its top priorities. There is a lot that can and needs to be done. Filling data gaps and improving firms' disclosure is crucial to risks and to facilitate their integration in investment strategies. Central banks can cooperate in establishing a common framework to measure climate-related risks and to integrate them in their risk management practices. In this perspective, central banks should also lead by example, by disclosing their climate-related exposure and explaining how they take climate risks into account in their own investment strategies. Reliable scenario analysis is essential. The standardized scenarios prepared by the network for greening the financial system provide a promising common reference framework for the assessment of macro-financial risks related to climate change. National government should then play a decisive role. Besides underlining the importance of carbon pricing schemes, I would reiterate the needs for removing environmental harmful subsidies, thereby promoting a reallocation of capital towards green investment. This year, Italy is not only chairing the G20, but is also partnered with the UK presidency, which is leading the G7, for the next COP26. We are therefore strongly committed in building a consensus among the members of the G20 in order to bring concrete and ambitious results at the COP26, making this year a turning point in the fight against climate change. Within the G20, the Financial Stability Board has been given the task to report on disclosure and data gaps. The IMF has also been asked to consider climate issues in a new data gaps initiative and, together with the OECD, to prepare a report on the role of taxation to tackle climate change, which will be discussed during a high-level tax symposium to be held in July. Under our initiative, the G20 has revised the group. We have proposed China and the United States to co-chair this group, and we are very grateful for the decision to accept this responsibility. The group, which is being upgraded to a fully fledged working group, has made rapid progress in the last weeks and is now focusing its work on 3 areas: sustainability reporting, the metrics for classifying and verifying investment sustainability, the way to enhance the contribution of international financial institutions to the goals of the Paris Agreement. In the first half of May, the group will organize the G20 Finance Roundtable with the private sector. The purpose of this event will be to offer an in-depth perspective from a range of private sector stakeholders on the agenda for this year and to provide specific suggestions to feed into the G20 roadmap to advance the sustainable finance agenda. This will lead the way towards the Venice Climate Summit, also to be held next July, in which we will explore ways to scale up dedicated finance to support global and consistent policies to pursue a just transition towards carbon neutral economy. Let me conclude by saying that I am grateful for the fact that there has been a large recognition across all countries of the importance of this agenda. The transition to net zero emissions is essential if we want to reduce the risks that climate change poses to the well-being of the present and future generations. By continuing to work together, central banks, supervisory authorities, and the financial sector at large will be able to provide a key contribution to reach our climate goals.
Well, thank you, Governor Busco. In his presentation, he particularly mentioned that as the presidency of the G20, Italy has proposed to relaunch the Sustainable Finance Study Group. A few years back, that study group was upgraded into a working group. And under that mechanism, a few items are to be carried out this year. First is the roadmap for G20 sustainability. Second, information disclosure report system for sustainability, sustainable finance, as well as taxonomy and verification standards for sustainable finance. Okay.
And now, lead speaker session on the agenda now. And first, I'd like to give the floor to Deborah Lear, the Vice Chairman of and Executive Director, Paulson Institute via video.
for inviting the Paulson Institute to be part of this prestigious event on financing carbon neutrality. I'm almost sorry that I can't be with you in person today. This event is being held at a generational moment. We're on the verge of a climate boom driven by many players around this table today. The Chinese government has joined the European Union as a leader on green finance, and we're now seeing others follow: the Middle East, Latin America, Africa, and of course, the United States, to make the transition to carbon neutrality a top priority. We have the opportunity for a green recovery in this post-pandemic world with the right political will. Green finance has moved from a charitable activity into the mainstream for business. Leading investment banks, hedge funds, and other financial institutions around the world have made this transition a priority and are prepared to use the power of their platforms to make it happen. Climate change is now also a business. In addition to the priority that companies are placing on their own transition to net zero, we're seeing investment opportunities on a scale not seen since the technology boom in the 1990s. In China, Goldman Sachs, in a recent study, has estimated that there is a $16 trillion opportunity in environmental goods and services in the market. And by allowing that market to open up, it could create up to 40 million jobs by 2060. China's carbon exchange is another area. When it launches in June with just one industry, it will not only cover around 45% of China's own global carbon emissions, but 14% of global emissions. That is a big idea that can have a big impact, particularly when the other 7 industries join, which could potentially cover up to 30% of global emissions. Lots of opportunity there. But we have to ensure that this carbon business does not turn into a carbon clash. We need to look to create the right framework to allow for competitiveness in climate that benefits all, not to create a climate clash between countries over technology. I'm confident that with the minds around this table today and the discussions that we'll hear, we can start that process. I wish you great success for this forum and discussion, and hope to be able to join you in person next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Deborah Leah. Paulson Institute has been committed to advancing green finance in China in the past few years. On behalf of my organization, I'd like to express my thanks to Paulson Institute and Mr. Deborah Lear. And now I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Ouyang Weiming, President of China Development Bank. Now you have the floor. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, friends. Carbon neutrality is the necessary path for the world economy. In 2020, global temperature rose or was 1.2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial level, wreaking havoc on the productions and life. President Xi Jinping pointed out the Paris Agreement in response to the climate change represents the direction for green finance. For protection of the Mother Earth, China implements its commitment promoting peaking and neutrality, transforming our economies and societies, transitioning toward green finance in development, far-reaching for our industrial structure, production, and lifestyle. Green finance is an important part of peaking and neutrality. Government funds are far from enough. Green projects are generally positive in externalities, but face insufficient capital and cash flows. We need better integration between markets and the government. Synergy in policies is important. At present, China now has in place green finance systems, including criteria, statistics standards, disclosure, and assessment for verification. Next up, we need to improve further the policies in taxation, industries, land, and environment protection. Also important is green finance supply. Incentives and restraint system needs to be reformed and improved for the long cycle green finance projects as a priority for the innovative financial tools and diversified financial products for channeling green finance. Sustainable financing model. Catalyst, the government and different entities can play the role of a catalyst to allocate the resources and transform them into assets with a higher efficiency and better sustainability, as well as lower cost. For instance, the wastewater and waste solids treatment, water and heat provision, these are the quasi-public good areas with a common contribution by the households, local governments, businesses, government agencies, as well as the general community. The projects can also contribute so that we can achieve balance between markets and other entities. Development finance can be an important force. Development is our main goal for paving the way for future development, addressing imbalance in development. For years, China Development Bank has been promoting sustainable development. In China, we financed the high-quality development in the Yellow River Delta and Pearl River Delta development. Green debt outstanding balance exceeded 2.3 trillion RMB, and the cumulative balance achieving 70 billion RMB, with hundreds of green finance-related projects covering 100 local prefectures with 100 billion yuan of credit commitments, covering 1,000 counties in China, or 1 trillion RMB worth of social financing. Internationally, CDB commits to green finance, environmental protection, and sustainable development, with the complete set of rating system in place in terms of ESG impact in areas of infrastructure and industrial cooperation in industries and social livelihood, with $160 billion worth in the Belt and Road Initiative countries. Asia is also one of our priority countries, with outstanding loan exceeding $70 billion. For instance, the Carrot hydraulic station in Pakistan with 320 billion kilowatts of power generation, contributing to the reductions of emissions. Going forward, CDB will continue to work with everybody in contributing to a better world in China, in Asia, and the rest of the world. Thank you so much, President Ouyang. Now, the next speaker is Zhang Wencai from Agricultural Development Bank of China, ADB, Mr. Zhang Wencai, Vice President. Thank you, Mr. Ma Jun. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, good afternoon. the pandemic has been hitting the world economy with great cost. This is also an opportunity for us to leverage to promote the transition toward green finance. The IMF also has promoted the transition. Over 110 economies have made promises of, as well as timetable for net zero. A series of meetings will also be held on climate change. China has been paying a lot of attention to climate change. Will be consistently and actively developing strategies as well as the governance addressing climate change. President Xi Jinping on September 22nd of 2020 at the 75th General Assembly of the United Nations announced the 2030 peak as well as neutrality in 2060 goal, which shows China's determination and commitment to addressing climate change and green finance and green economy. The fifth plenum of Chinese Communist Party also included the peaking and neutrality as part of our 2035 vision. Other documents and policies also include the 30-60 goals. In March, President Xi Jinping at the 9th Financial and Economic Conference pointed out the 30-60 goals is also to be integrated into the civilization and ecosystem development. Agriculture also is affected by the climate change in a big way. Emissions cuts and green development is important. According to President Xi Jinping's ideas, green finance for green development is important, especially in the rural and agricultural development, in balancing the different weaknesses and advantages. A lot of work has been done to achieve peaking and neutrality, and also to establish the brand image of a green bank. In the 6 categories, ADB financed over 360 billion yuan in support of infrastructure upgrades and in the environmental friendly projects over 440 billion yuan. And as of the end of 2020, green credit exceeded 848.4 billion yuan, accounting for 14%. An additional 110.9 billion, making records one after another. As the first development policy bank in China to issue green debt, and first for the Bond Connect, as well as in the Great Bay Area, green finance debt. As end of 2020, the certified green debt issued 72 billion yuan or 500 million euros, altogether 91.2 billion yuan of green debt. We continue to work with the different parties on the green finance, including the Belt and Road Initiative green investment principles.
Establishing a mutually integrated green financial standard and also work with CBI to together finish the study on the standards and also financial implications of China's agricultural green development. We're also establishing a green bond market, which signs agreements of partnership with Luxembourg Stock Exchange as well as Bond Connect. We continue to work with specific UN agencies, international financial organizations, and lending agencies in overseas markets, governments as well as financial institutions in China to improve our synergy in green financial services. Next step, we will focus on the new stage of green development to practice new mindsets and work with a new pattern, so that around the target of 3020, we find innovative supports for green finance, so that we can indeed be having greater scope of service, with better managerial system, and now we're becoming a green bank. In the past, we're called a green bank, a food bank. Now we're actually a green bank, using our actions to promote China's green development onto a new high, so as to meet the target of a carbon emission peak in carbon neutrality. First of all, we should accelerate the establishment of the green financial management system, as well as green credit policies and standards to make sure that the whole industry can develop in a green way, with a great, say, traction, so as to green this whole process. Second, we should focus on key areas to make sure that we better support green finance, focus on the Yangtze River protection as well as the Yellow River Basin. We service pollution prevention, water sense treatment, ecological conservation and restoration, flood safety, desert management, as well as water and soil conservation. We focus on green development in the countryside and in agriculture, support green production, production of green agri products, green warehousing in logistics, support the supply of major agricultural products. We support water safety in the countryside, as well as pollution in the countryside and overall management of countryside land. So also we're actually mainly looking at the greening of our state-owned land, for example, by supporting carbon credits, as well as the construction of a national reserve forest, ecological forest, as well as a carbon sink forest, so as to build ecological barrier. Also, we are looking at green financial products to better service SMEs, micro enterprises, as well as the countryside and agriculture with different green credit products. We're also looking at a green equity collateral, such as carbon exchange, energy use right, as well as discharge permits, so as to further expand the scope of green finance. Also, we're actually trying to work on new categories, new types of green bonds. If you look at, for example, carbon sink bond, climate bond, blue bonds, so that we can have larger portfolio, and also we're tapping international bond issuing markets so that we are having a larger scale of our bonds AUM. Fifthly, we should step up efforts in the management of environmental social risks of investment projects to better define and recognize different types of green loan project, green credit products. We should work with UN, IMF, and lending agencies of international governments, as well as international policy financial institutions, to learn from them their state-of-the-art experiences and best practice in actually using green finance in the countryside and dealing with climate change, so that we can work on joint studies over the targets of the carbon neutrality. Ladies and gentlemen, against climate change, as well as the targets of Paris Agreement and carbon neutrality, we really need the support and efforts made by international community, including financial institutions. We hope that we take this from this opportunity to meet the tide, to ride the tide, so that we can cooperate in greater depth, with greater breadth, so that we make contribution to green and quality development. Okay, now I'd like to invite the next speaker, Marcos from the Development Bank.
I'm very glad to be here. And as it has been clearly argued here today, living up to the objectives of the Paris Agreement and carbon neutrality requires significant capital investment. And these capital investments should be directed to new processes and technologies that enable the decarbonization of high carbon industries, as well as the provision of low carbon alternatives. Achieving carbon neutrality is a multi-fold task. It requires the mutually reinforcing of technology, sustainability, and finance. In this regard, multilateral development banks, such as the NDB, the New Development Bank, are very well suited to contribute to such kinds of tasks. As you all know, the NDB has been set up a few years ago by Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, some of the world's biggest emerging economies. By the way, the NDB is one of the few multilateral institutions that have sustainable development goals as part of its own constitution, of its own articles of agreement. Multidimensional challenges, as those that relate to carbon neutrality, can be addressed by projects that potentially are multiplied across the BRICS and the emerging world as a result of their positive demonstration effects. For us at the New Development Bank, it's particularly important to pursue following three approaches. First, ensure green at the source. The New Development Bank, along with private sector investors, will help member countries mobilize resources that are necessary for low carbon investment in the coming decades in areas such as renewable energy, green transportation, green buildings, low carbon manufacturing, and forestry. Central in this role, the NDB will contribute to both the reduction of high carbon investment and the massive increase in low carbon and zero carbon investment. The energy sector, for example, investment in new coal-fired power projects should be phased out, while investment targets should be significantly raised for solar and wind power, as well as energy storage technology. Second, helping green transition for legacy projects. The existing portfolio should be gradually brought into alignment with the requirements of the Paris Agreement. The NDB will help mainstream climate adaptation gradually across all of its operations in its member countries and help them implement and develop stronger nationally determined contributions. For example, the NDB will make financial resources available for energy and industrial companies so that they can adapt to low carbon technologies, and for building owners to retrofit in order to gain higher energy efficiency. And third, help member countries establish enabling institutions for carbon neutrality. In order for all of the objectives that I've mentioned here today to take place effectively, an institution that is conducive to implementation is indispensable. That includes policies, standards, information disclosure, climate risk analysis, incentives mechanism, among other factors. One trait that distinguishes the NDB is the sharing of knowledge. We at our bank also undertake to learn from the best practices and share with our member countries in their quest for carbon neutrality. Finally, Professor Majun, on a broader scope, let me tell you that supporting carbon neutrality should go hand in hand with those training and reskilling programs that will allow workers to play as productive and rewarding a role as possible in the green paradigms of the economy 4.0. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Chojo. As we were speaking, we're actually arranging a conversation between China and Brazil on sustainable farming and green finance. That was coming with the support from President Chojo. And I think next month I'll be hosting that conversation to discuss options of how Chinese green finance capacity can help developing sustainable agriculture in Brazil. Now, let's move on to our next speaker, Mr. Martin Shirk, who is the CEO of International Capital Market Association. Martin, can you hear us?
Very well. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Very good. Well, firstly, it's a pleasure to be one of the speakers at today's roundtable as part of the influential Bauer Forum. Thank you very much. What I'd like to speak about, the role of the bond markets in financing the transition to a carbon neutral economy in line with the targets set by many countries and, of course, the goals of the Paris Agreement, and how we at the International Capital Market Association, ICMA, how we are supporting those goals. ICMA is the International Trade Association for participants in the international bond markets, investors, issuers, intermediaries, and market infrastructures. And we play a role in setting internationally accepted market standards in 4 core areas of the markets: the primary markets, secondary markets, repo and collateral markets, and most relevant to our discussion today, the sustainable bond markets. And clearly, the scale of financing needed to move to a carbon neutral economy is vast. We've all heard the figures, they've been mentioned today again. And the challenges for all of us at global, regional, national, corporate, and individual levels to contribute. And in order to succeed, we need to have a mechanism to mobilize financing from all quarters towards environmental objectives. And here, the capital markets have an immensely important role to fulfill in channeling funds sustainably. Since 2014, acting as the secretariat for a global grouping of near 400 institutions, issuers, investors, intermediaries, NGOs, and service providers, all of them active in the capital markets. ICMA has nurtured the growth of the green, social, and sustainable bond issuance through the creation and development of a series of voluntary principles. And these are the green bond principles, the social bond principles, and the sustainability bond guidelines. And these principles enshrine the concept of use of proceeds, namely that the proceeds of these bonds must be used to finance or refinance projects, assets, or activities which actively contribute to defined environmental or social objectives. The principles also set standards for project selection, for the management of the proceeds, and very importantly, for enhanced disclosure as to how the money will be used to further the environmental and social objectives. And there are also recommendations for external reviews to validate the sustainable credentials of the underlying projects, assets, or activities. I imagine that most people are aware of these. Now, this segment of the market has grown exponentially over the last few years. And when you look at it now, it's almost become a mainstream funding channel. And interestingly, around 95% of the green, social, or sustainability bond issues globally are aligned with ICMA's principles. So in fact, the principles have become the de facto global standard, enhancing market integrity and ensuring that greenwashing is avoided or at least minimized. And as the market becomes even more mainstream and the urgency increases to address the challenges of climate change, green finance has become an overriding policy objective for most countries. As a result of this, we've seen a move towards regulation rather than voluntary standards. And at ICMA, we've been helping many countries design and implement thoughtful and appropriate regulation. Not surprisingly, in most cases, the green bond principles tend to be the foundation on which that regulation is based. Examples would be the ASEAN Green Bond Standards, China's Green Bond Guidelines, and the future EU Green Bond Standard. We're also contributing in many countries to helping create appropriate taxonomies, setting out usable technical standards to define precisely what is deemed to be green and/or sustainable. We're a member of the EU Platform on Sustainable Finance, been working with the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum, and on various working groups in Hong Kong, China, and Russia. This is all work in progress, it's complex, and it differs from region to region depending on the specificities of each economy's reliance on hard-to-abate industries. And over time, we do expect these various taxonomies to continue to converge. So use of proceeds bonds have been a straightforward and robust way to kickstart the sustainable bond markets, but they're only part of the answer. If we're to make meaningful progress along the road to decarbonization, we need to find a capital market mechanism to support, allowing a broader range of entities to participate in the sustainable bond markets, including companies in these hard-to-abate industries. And this is perhaps the major area of interest currently in the sustainable bond markets. And ICMA has contributed to the development of financing a pathway to transition with the publication of sustainability-linked bond principles last June, and then at the end of last year with the publication of the Climate Transition Finance Handbook. Now, the sustainability-linked bond principles give guidance to issuers taking a more holistic view of their sustainability strategy in all areas of their business. They allow companies to set measurable sustainability performance targets using key performance indicators against which they're assessed with the understanding that failure to meet them will result in a meaningful financial penalty. For example, requiring them to pay a higher interest rate to investors. And this is already proving a popular route to transition for companies in a wide range of industry sectors, and it's an equally popular product for investors in the ESG space. Also in 2020, we published the Climate Transition Finance Handbook. This is designed to support the growth of climate transition finance by giving clear guidelines on the disclosures that should be made by issuers on their climate change strategies when they raise funds in debt capital markets using green, social, sustainability, or sustainability-linked bonds in line with the principles. We're very hopeful that new guidance on climate transition will allow a wider range of issuers to participate with credibility and with transparency in the sustainable finance markets and contribute to a faster transformation to the global climate-friendly economy that's so urgently needed. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mark. We agree with you that the sustainable finance standards and disclosure requirements need to converge. In fact, what the G20 is doing is to promote some such convergence. Now, 我们现在请
Now, I'd like to give the floor to the Chief Economist of ICBC, Zhou Yejun. Thank you, Mr. Ma. My remarks is actually originally scheduled to be made by President Liao, but he has a last-minute change in the schedule. Now, carbon neutrality has much to do with the demand side, supply side, production, and life, as well as all areas of the society and economy. It is transformational revolution affecting the future direction, as well as sustainability. Financial sector has the capacity and responsibility in playing a role in neutrality. The previous speakers talked about the same thing, despite coming from different institutions, financial institutions especially so. ICBC has been working with global financial institutions in promoting green finance, in developing platforms and initiatives with great results. Firstly, green development is increasingly a consensus in the global financial sector. ICBC is now working with many countries' financial institutions in exploring pathways of green development. As pointed out by Mr. Ma, there are many platforms with the important roles played by the FIs. For instance, the Global Investors for Sustainable Development, GISD, and the Green Investment Principles of BRI, et cetera, including the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, as well as a Green Finance Roundtable under Belt and Road Initiative. Secondly, carbon neutrality is now incorporated into sustainable finance system. Both China and the EU have written into laws and regulations important part of their strategies, being the green finance into the laws and regulations. ICBC has also been working toward the end of carbon neutrality, promoting the transition, especially from the perspectives of green debt and other financial tools, as well as the structure of finance. Thirdly, ESG, in leading green investments, with the ESG asset management accounting for about 1/3 of the total global asset management. The Chinese government encouraged financial institutions to include ESG factors into their credit rating system and risk management processes. So too is ICBC in this process. For instance, we've been working with relevant entities in jointly releasing the CSI 180 ESG index so that we can promote the better performing businesses in ESG. Fourthly, Fintech enabling the transition. Typically, Fintech is promoting efficiency and innovation. In reality, Fintech is also playing a role in green finance. Last year, because of the pandemic, ICBC seized the opportunity of using the online services in bringing down the cost for the services in line with the industry. President Xi Jinping proposed the idea of nature conservancy is the source of great wealth. ICBC is committed to green development, serving our clients across the world with the green finance services so that we can make contribution to sustainability. We have three considerations. Number one, improving the landscape for green finance around the 3060 goals to improve green finance system, including carbon neutrality into the corporate governance system as well as the performance assessment system, etc. In addition to our internal transition, we hope to provide more financing and intellectual support to the transition. Number two, innovation for green finance. It is our hope that new tools, pathways, and channels will be used to promote innovation toward green finance, including big data, Internet of Things, blockchain technologies, so that we can improve our risk management capabilities and capacity in the environment and climate related areas, supporting green finance in products and services. Number three, international cooperation for green finance in environment, climate, resource conservation, high efficiency of utilization and poverty reduction related areas. The interbank regular cooperation mechanism for Belt and Road Initiative will be better utilized for cooperation across the international financial system for experience sharing and co-financing project to gain new results. We hope to work with like-minded peers across the world, promote value chain and the supply chain, achieving the goal of neutrality. Thank you. Thank you, Chief Economist Mr. Zhou. And now the last item of our agenda, roundtable discussion with a number of representatives from financial institutions and other organizations. I will not introduce the names. Please limit your intervention into 3 minutes so that we can have more interaction later. Now we have one participant from the video. I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Muhammad Aurangzeb, President and CEO of HBL Bank.
Thank you, Dr. Majun. I would like to take this opportunity, first of all, for the kind invitation to this August forum, but also our personal thanks to you and to your team in terms of the ongoing guidance that we have received from you and the team, and both for the institution that is HBL and for the country where we are located is Pakistan. Now, simply from a country perspective, as you know, Pakistan is the 5th most vulnerable country to climate change. And of course, our government has taken multi-pronged approach towards negotiating this challenge. It's based on nature-based solutions, including the forestry part in terms of 1 billion plantation target, which is set for June of this year, but also in terms of some of the targets which have been mentioned by other esteemed speakers around 2030. Here in Pakistan, the government has announced that 60% of all energy produced in the country will be clean by the time we get there in about 9 to 10 years. And also that 30% of the country's vehicles will use electricity by 2030. Now, I think it's all fine that the government has made these announcements, but as we are learning, from all the esteemed speakers here, that to make it a real success, it will require an entire ecosystem. I was looking and hearing very attentively to the president of PBOC, and the way he talked about capacity building, incentivization, disclosure policy. And again, Dr. Majun, with your help, we are hoping that here in the country, HBL and the State Bank of Pakistan can work with you and your team in terms of really establishing the green taxonomy framework that we can use to effectively take this entire agenda forward in Pakistan. Now, HBL as the largest bank in the country, we are trying to contribute in our small way in this country's journey. So, we've obviously invested in our ESG capacity building with a skilled team, and know Mr. Qasim Dar, who heads up our environment practice here at HBL. But last year, we are the first bank which very publicly announced that we will not do any new financing for coal-based energy projects. While we will grandfather some of the projects in which we have done the financing, but as you can imagine, in an emerging economy in Pakistan, this was a big announcement, but we also had to be sure that we walk the talk, right? So that's an announcement that we've made. We have heard about the green bonds. We are very privileged that we are going to be part of the first or the inaugural green bond that is going to be issued by the largest electric utility in Pakistan. It's going to be a $500 million issue. And we, as HBL, are going to be a co-manager on this issue. So these are all small steps. I would say these are baby steps. We want to learn from you, your team, from China in terms of the best practices. And we look forward to ongoing engagement, Dr. Majun, with you and your team, and indeed with this forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Aurangzeb. I definitely agree with you that taxonomy is the basis for developing a green financial system in the country and also for developing a green business within the bank. Now, let me now give the floor to a few speakers in the room, and then I will come back to Frank if you still wanted to talk a little bit later. 我们现在就开放在
And now the floor is open for discussions. I will not be calling on anyone. Feel free to raise your hands. From Chartered Bank, Madam Zhang. Now about the micro level, our 2030 opportunity report suggests that in the next 10 years, the 3 UN goals will cover about $10 trillion, out of which 1/3 is focused in China. So for financing opportunities, it is tremendous.
Also, I had a question about $50 trillion. Namely, we're actually interviewing globally the top 300 investment managers, which together have an AUM of $50 trillion for sustainable financing investment. 81% of the enterprises or asset managers actually said that things are in the pipeline or they are about to kick off. However, only 30% of that assets is actually categorized in this regard in that $50 trillion. 32% are United States, Europe, a bit over 20% present in Asia Pacific, while the others radically distributed. Well, over 50% of those respondents say that China is a priority market. Well, this may not be the ideal situation. For investment managers, they told us that they consider a few factors to accelerate their investment. First is regulatory reform. Second, preferential taxation. Third, greater return. And fourth, measurable statistics. And also we look at retail investors' needs. So this is from the story of the investors. What about the carbon emitting enterprises? In Q1 this year, when it just began, we launched the income report of net zero emission by interviewing 250 multinational corporations, as well as 100 investment managers. To them, the biggest hurdle is still in funding. That's what we're talking about today, how we use investment to help them further. 67% of the respondents thought that funding is the greatest challenge. Among them, especially for some of those brownfield enterprises trying to go green, they're kept in a dilemma. Cannot meet each end. So the task for them is particularly